Good evening, everyone. I'm Gretchen Crosby Sims, Executive Director here at the Institute of Politics. We are pleased and grateful to welcome Chicago Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson to campus on a momentous day for him. And we look forward to his conversation with Brandis Friedman of Chicago tonight. We appreciate you keeping this commitment, Superintendent, and we want to thank you for your service to our city.
Thank you.
Our mission at the Institute of Politics is to inspire in students a desire to make a difference in their communities and in our democracy, and you are an excellent example of that.
Thank you.
I do want to briefly flag a couple of events next week. Next Monday, Brian Hook, the Trump administration's special representative to Iran, will be in conversation with New York Times' national security correspondent David Sanger. And next Wednesday, we are convening a panel of community organizers from around the city to discuss the art of grassroots activism and what young advocates can learn from Chicago organizers. For more information about IOP events, please visit our website at politics.uchicago.edu. After the discussion, we will open up the floor to take questions from the audience. Please line up behind the microphone that's going to be, I think, just in the center aisle here. As usual, we give priority for the first 3 questions to students, and we ask that you keep your questions brief so that we can get through as many of them as possible. Please now make sure that your phones are on silent. And now to formally introduce our speaker is Tom Brija. Tom is a third year from Chicago studying political science and history. During his time at the Institute of Politics, he's been a Fellows Ambassador and a member of the Chicago Style Events Committee. This year, he participated in the IOP Summer in Washington Internship Program, and he is the chair of our News and Views Committee. Please join me in welcoming Tom to the podium.
Good evening, everyone. The motto of the Chicago Police Department is we serve and protect. There is hardly a more fitting tagline for the life of Superintendent Johnson. In 1988, Eddie Johnson began his career as a Chicago police officer. After nearly 3 decades of serving and protecting the city of Chicago, rising through the ranks from beat cop to commander of the 6th District to the chief of patrol, Eddie Johnson became Superintendent Johnson in 2016 with the unanimous approval of the City Council. The superintendent stepped into his new role with a department that was besieged on all sides, as has continued to be through his tenure. Superintendent Johnson has navigated public controversies, a Justice Department investigation, and a consent decree. And throughout it all, the department has lost many of its own. 4 officers took their own lives just this past year, and last year was an especially tragic year for Chicago policemen in the line of duty, with the killings of police officer Eduardo Marmolejo, police officer Conrad Gary, police officer Samuel Jimenez, and Commander Paul Bauer. We can never say the superintendent's job has been easy, but at the very least, we can say he has done his job. He has worked tirelessly to repair the department's relationship with the city while asserting the force as an effective one. Just in this past week, CPD has released data indicating crimes such as robberies and car thefts are at 20-year lows. October homicides are down nearly 25% over the same period last year, and overall crime in the city has declined in total by 10% year to date. This data continues a trend showing steady declines for the last 3 years. It also continues a trend of a man dedicated to protecting his city. This morning, Superintendent Johnson announced his retirement, and tonight he joins us to discuss the insights he has gained over 30 years serving the city of Chicago. The moderator for our conversation is Brandis Friedman, correspondent and host for WTTW Chicago Tonight. Mrs. Friedman is a lifelong journalist who has written innumerable articles about all things Chicago-related, from the teacher strike to city contracts to gun violence in the city. Mrs. Friedman, Superintendent Johnson, we are all incredibly grateful for you joining us tonight. It is my great honor to welcome you to the Institute of Politics.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like you all to join me in introducing and welcoming our 2 guests.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks to the IOP for having me. I think, what are the odds that you chose this morning to make it?
I know, right?
And then we're here tonight. Like, I threw out all my questions this morning. And started. I knew that you'd be here, but I'm like, we have different things to talk about now. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Busy day for you.
Quite busy.
Yeah.
Quite busy.
Well, he's warmed up. He's done a number of interviews today. So
I have.
he saved all the good stuff for us. So I will start with your big news of the day. This morning you talked about a moment in September when you were honoring the police officers who Tom just named, who died in the line of duty last year, that you were talking to their wives at this event. And during that event, you leaned over and you said to the mayor, we have to start thinking about a timetable for me.
Yep, I did.
What was it about that moment and about that day that made you start thinking about retirement?
So, having a job like this, you deal with trauma almost every day. When I was a beat cop and homicide sergeant on the west side, that's all you would see. But that did help prepare me for being superintendent. So let's fast forward to September 10th of this year. The widows of Samuel Jimenez, Conrad Gary, and Eduardo Marmoleo, of course, we were honoring their husbands. So before the ceremony started, I was talking to the three of them because we keep in touch. One of the worst fears of any police chief is losing a cop under your watch. You realize there's a high probability, especially in a city like this, that that's going to happen. But you don't expect it to come like it did last year. So I was standing there talking to them, and I could see they were proud that their husbands were being honored. But at the same time, I could see the pain in their faces, because that pain, you never reconcile that. It gets better with time, of course, but you never reconcile it. And I could see the pain in their faces. But then an odd thing happened. And I don't know if it was because we were standing. If you've ever been to the police memorial, there's a waterfall in the back of it. And the way it was lit up, I could actually see their husbands' faces on their faces. So I sat down next to the mayor, and I just whispered in her ear, we need to start thinking about when it's time for me to leave, because I just, looking at those ladies, I tell you, the strength that they've shown throughout this ordeal. But as a superintendent, you constantly, I think about those officers every day. And it grinds at you that what could you have done to maybe prevent that from happening? And so when that happened, I just told her, I said, we need to start thinking about that. And I could tell I caught her off guard, because she had never said anything to me prior to that about, when I wanted to leave. She's been a friend and a huge supporter of mine for years, and vice versa. So we never had that conversation despite what was out there in the media. And so that night I told her that, and to her credit, she said, you know what, when you get ready to discuss it, let's talk about it. And I still wasn't sure quite what that was going to look like, because my wife had been pressing me all year, but I was like, yeah, whatever, but I didn't really, pay it that much attention. But that night was the first night that it hit me. And then, when our beloved Bears went to London last month, my family planned a trip and included me. And go figure, right?
You can come.
Because I've gotten left out of a lot of things over the years because of the job. And so it was the first time since I've been superintendent that I had been away from the city that long. And it was the first time since I've been superintendent that I was able to enjoy my family with no interruptions. And my staff, they did a wonderful job in not calling me much. The mayor did much, and the mayor did too, and I appreciated that. But what it did, I recognized how much they missed having me just to themselves for that period of time. But on the flip side, I realized how much I missed them in that way. So we went to Paris and London, and we were there for about 8 days, and we just had a blast just being a family. So when we were coming back on the plane, I told my wife, I said, you know what? This is it. And I love this department. So it's not easy, but mentally, I'm in a good place, because I just think that I've done my job, as, not just as superintendent, but as a police officer. And I don't want to keep putting them through that, where they're missing me all the time. So that's how we got here to today.
You said the job it's obviously taken a toll, and you kind of described just now like the weight of carrying the responsibility of these officers and the trauma that you've seen over your career, and being away from your family so much. It sounds like the weight of it, you've carried it long enough.
Yeah.
How would you describe the toll?
It's, you know, the thing about being a superintendent of the second largest department in the country, I was as close to this seat as you can get, being first a deputy chief in the Bureau of Patrol, but then the chief of patrol. And I still had no idea what it was actually going to entail until I actually sat in the seat. But over that time, it does take a toll on you mentally, physically. You know, I've had some health issues. I actually had a kidney transplant, you know.
On the job.
On the job. You know, and I'll never forget Mary Emanuel. He is so funny. So after I had the transplant and they released me from the hospital, I had the transplant on a Wednesday night. I get home Saturday morning. He calls me Saturday morning. He said, how you feeling? I said, pretty good. He said, well, take your time. You know, this stuff will be here, but hurry the fuck up. You know, but that's my guy.
That doesn't sound like language that Mayor Emanuel would use.
Of course not. but it is truly a sacrifice. One of the reporters asked me earlier today, what was my average day like during the week? Now remember, being a superintendent of a large city, there's always something, Sunday to Sunday. But my average work week, I would usually get to the office somewhere 9:15 to 9:30. And I probably would leave during the week, probably about 9:30, 10 o'clock every single night. Every single night. That's just part of it. And in that day, you know, and I feel bad for these guys because, you know, they have to go with me everywhere. And trying to eat decently was a challenge because you're ripping and running. So it takes a toll on you mentally, physically, you know, your health, your family, because they have to put up with a lot. Because remember, for me, in a city like this, so let's say I get home at 9:30 at night. Now, in full disclosure, about 45 minutes to an hour of that time would be used to work out with these guys. So we did do that. So I get home 9:30, take a shower. Hopefully I would have eaten already. I get ready for bed. It's on the weekends, especially during the summer, it was inevitable that my phone was gonna ring midnight, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, and wake me up because they have to notify me anytime there's a police officer involved in something. You know, he gets into a traffic stop and gets dragged along the street, they gotta call me for that. If we have a shooting with multiple victims, they gotta wake me up and call me for that. You know, and sometimes with those incidents, once you get that first call, it just rolls all night. So I often would get up out the bedroom, go in another room, get my little spot on the couch, and that's where I would be all night. So it takes a toll on you and everybody that cares about you.
You've been asked repeatedly whether retirement now is related to the investigation that you requested into yourself. For those who aren't familiar, you were found asleep in your car several weeks ago.
Right.
For clarification, was this a combination of the new medication, a few drinks at dinner? What happened?
You know, okay, so there's an inspector general investigation, so he'll accuse me of trying to steer it one way or another. So I actually can't comment on the specifics, but what I can say is I know how I felt that night, you know, and you know, you have to know yourself, and we had worked a long day that day and the day before. So, you know, I would love to be able to kind of go into the specifics of that, but unfortunately I can't, so I apologize for that.
Sure. It sounds like that event could be more of a reflection of the toll that you just described.
It's a grind, it is, and I've been doing it for 4 years now. Yeah.
Why did you become a police officer?
You know what? So my mother, I know she, bless her heart, she still is asking that same question. So believe it or not, academics always came easy for me. School was a breeze, man. And so I actually went to school to be a doctor. I wanted to be a pediatrician. And I went to Eastern Illinois with pre-med, and a family friend, a young lady family friend of ours, went to a house party one night during the summer. And make a long story short, some guys saw her walking to the bus stop and they grabbed her, raped her, and killed her. And man, I just remember the devastation that caused. And that kind of changed my trajectory, because then it went from wanting to be a pediatrician to wanting to be a public servant. And that's really what caused me to take the police exam.
During your speech today, you also said that you saw violence growing up in Chicago, be it, in Cabrini Green before your family moved to Washington Heights. But you said you also saw that those who swore to serve and protect used violence and intimidation.
Yeah.
What did you see?
So, living in Cabrini Green, that was in the 60s. There was a lot of great people that lived over there, but it was still plagued with gangs and violence. We lived on the 10th floor, so the gang members would come up on the roof of our apartment and they would shoot across all the time. And we didn't realize it. I realize it now that we were suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome before there was one. We just didn't know it. So one night, there was a couple of people killed outside of our building. And it was probably about 11:30 at night. But it was, even though we were living on the 10th floor, it was loud enough, the gunshots, for us to hear it from our 10th floor apartment. So me, my dad, my brother, my mother, we're all looking out the window and trying to see what was going on. So my father, like most men, wanted to be nosy. So he's got on his pajamas and his bathrobe and slippers. So he goes downstairs just to see what's going on. And we're looking out the window, and we see the police talking to him, and clearly this guy was in bed. We're looking out the window, and we see them getting rough with him. And he's trying to tell them, I just came out here to see what was going on. They locked him up. So I'm a small kid watching some white cops just disrespect my father like that. And man, that's hard for a son to see something like that when your dad just left from up here with you and he's your protector. But to his credit, that next day they sat us all down and talked to us and told us, because we had a lot of good cops that worked in Cabrini Green, but we had some that we knew to stay away from because they would take a phone book, punch you in the face, stuff like that. So I saw all that growing up. So that's a constant reminder to me moving up through CPD to be right with people.
So you did move up through CPD, and when you became the superintendent, though, you hadn't applied for the job at the time. Why didn't you apply?
That's what Ron Emanuel asked me. Well, you know what, Brandis, at the time, I was chief of patrol. My friend John Escalante was the interim superintendent at the time, and I knew he wanted the job, and we came up together. And I didn't want to compete with him. So that was one of the things. Also, I knew that I had to deal with the kidney issue. That's when it really started going south. So I knew I was going to have to deal with it at some point. So that was the second piece of it. But then the third and probably most important piece, I knew if I became superintendent, my family was going to have to live in a bubble. And I just didn't know if I wanted to do that to them. And so, in full disclosure, my plan, what did God say? You want to make God laugh, make some plans? Yeah, so my plan was to let this new superintendent come in, whomever it would be, and then the next time around, apply for it. Because I always thought I could do the job. So that's why I didn't.
So he didn't have to sell you on it or convince you? Twist your arm a little bit?
Okay, so this is what happened. Of course, the police search was conducted, and the mayor, Rahm Emanuel, didn't particularly like those three choices. So I'm just kicking around in the Bureau of Patrol doing what I do as a chief, not a care about that in the world. I really wasn't thinking about it. And he had one of his folks call me to ask me, would I come down to City Hall? And I'm like, what do you want me to go down there for? Because remember, I didn't know Rahm Emanuel at the time at all. So I'm thinking, first thing you think is, what'd you do? That's the first thing you think, yep. So I went down there, and that's when he approached me about being the superintendent. So we haggled about it for real for almost 2 weeks, because he was trying to push me in that direction, but I think he recognized he just wasn't getting me there. And so, and I hadn't told my family at all that I was having these conversations with him. And so we went back and forth for about 2 weeks, and he calls me down in his office at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning. And he says, and it's just he and I. He said, listen, I know you don't know me, and I don't know you. He said, but everywhere that I go, people keep telling me about you. He put his hand on my shoulder and he said, listen, you don't know it, but your city needs you right now. And I'm asking you as your mayor to take this job. So I'm stuck now. But, what do I say to that? When your mayor asks you to do something like that for your city, it's hard to say no. So I told him, okay, I'm gonna give you a tentative yes, but I gotta get my family together and talk to them, because I couldn't do this without their support. So I got them all together that day and just talked to them about it. Of course, they were all, yeah. But I tried to explain to them, okay, if I do this, it's gonna impact everybody. But they didn't care. They were like, nope, because we all had been talking about it. You should apply it in the first place, So I called him back and told him it was a go, and that's how I got to where I am today.
You took the job at an historic time.
Yes.
I think a lot of us remember the video from Laquan McDonald's death had just been released. Former cop Jason Van Dyke had been arrested and charged. The city was reeling. I know me and a lot of reporters in the room probably remember covering all of the marches and the demonstrations. What was the police department like at the time? What was the job like?
It was a complete mess. It was a mess. The morale was just, it was bottomed out. Because let's face it, whichever way you fall on the Laquan McDonald video is where you are with it. But these police officers, they did not want to be the next viral video. Not one of them. Not one of them. And we had just signed into an agreement with the ACLU regarding how we conducted street stops. So they were reeling about that. Our superintendent was fired. So it was a complete mess. And so I knew a couple of things. Now, by the time I was sworn in, violence was out of control. And it was a result of all that stuff happening at the same time. But I knew a few things. I knew I had to get that violence back under control. I knew I had to pump up the morale of the rank and file. But I also knew I had to quickly try to repair the damage in the black community with the police department. So those three things, man, it was a lift. So the first 6 to 8 months, it was about 8 months that I was superintendent. So you figure I got sworn in April 13th. To sometime in October of that year, every single day, Saturday, Sunday included, every single day, I was either with the rank and file in some capacity or I was with the community in some capacity. And now in retrospect, I recognize one of the best things I did, but God is a funny dude, man. He is, he's a funny guy. He puts you in places to help you succeed. And right when I was named the interim superintendent, I was in a diner one morning with my wife having breakfast. And I kept, you know how you feel somebody staring a hole through the back of your head? And I told her, I said, look back there and see if you see somebody looking at me. And so she looked and she said, I don't recognize those people, but I think that's Robin Robinson, the TV lady. And I was like, so I peeked over, and it was her, but she was with some of the activists that were just angry with the police. And I'm telling you, when I tell you they gave me a death stare, man, if looks could kill. So I got up from the table, and I went over there and walked over there to them. And I said, let me ask you all something. I said, I know you're upset. I get that. I said, I'm here to try to fix this, but I need you all's help to fix it. And I said, what's the first thing you think I need to do to try to repair this relationship? And one of them said, invite me to your office to sit down. Done. That's an easy thing. So I invited every one of them to my office one at a time. And the first guy that came up there, I will never forget this. When he got up there, and I mean, he was the bane of my existence as the chief of patrol. This dude just, anything that CPD did, he just banged against it. So he was the first one I invited up. And I remember him sitting in the chair, and he was just looking around. He looked at stuff on the wall. He was looking out the window. And I was like, "You okay?" And he said, "You know what? I've been trying to get up here for 7 years to talk to the police superintendent." He said, "I cannot believe right now, at this moment, I'm sitting here talking to you." But what resulted from all of that, I not only talked to them about what they thought we needed to do to get better and improve that relationship, I gave them all my cell phone number. I said, "So now when you have questions and something happens, you can call me." And the thing about me, I'm balls and strikes. I'm straight, no chaser. I'm going to tell you what the deal is, and then we'll deal with it from there. But I told them this: I'm not afraid to admit when the police department has goofed up. I will tell you when I have some questions about things. Now, when we're doing an investigation, I might not be able to tell you the specifics, but I will fully tell you, yeah, we got a problem here. And they embrace that. So those same activists that were railing against CPD are now today our partners in keeping this city, keeping the glue to this city together. And that's all it took, was sitting down, having conversation. That's all it took. So now they have helped me immensely over these past 4 years keep the tension in the black and brown communities down. So, you know, I think that was one of the best things that I did becoming superintendent.
Do you think the culture in the police department has changed for the better in these last 3-4 years?
I do. So I will share this with you, Brandon. So when you talk to experts about policing, they will say to you it takes anywhere from 5 to 7 years to change the police culture internally. And a lot of the reason we never get there is because the people on the top, if they believe in that change, they're often only there 3 or 4 years. So it never takes hold. It doesn't manifest because they leave too quickly. And if the person behind them doesn't believe in that same thing, then it slips back to how it always was. So that's always been in the back of my mind, being a superintendent. So this is what I can tell you all in answer to your question. Do I think that culture is changing? Yes, I do. And I didn't think it would happen this quickly, but a few things happened, I think, to help catapult us into that change. If you all recall, so I was sworn in April 13th of 2016. July 28th, about 7:30 p.m., CPD killed a young black kid in a stolen car, Paul O'Neill. The reason I remember that date so vividly is because it's that important. And the first thing that I did was got out there and said, I got some questions about what happened here. I have some questions. So I saw the video. This happens on a Thursday night. Friday morning, they brief me. I see the video. I have some questions looking at that video. I tell them, call those officers in Saturday morning. All right, so it's less than 48 hours. Call them in. I relieve them of their police powers. Of course, they call the union. The union is upset with Eddie Johnson. They are upset. So I tell them, because I try to be transparent. I call them in. Come on in. I'm going to let you see what I see. Look at the video. They look at the video. Now, they never said, I see issues, but I could tell in their body language. They knew we had some problems here. But this is what they said to me. Okay, it might be some things that I see you looking at, but this is just Saturday. This happened Thursday night. It's not even 48 hours. Why did you relieve them of their police powers so quickly? And so I said, well, look at that video. That's not going to change. Yeah, but we've never done it that way, which is true. Usually it would take weeks to months before something like that happened. And I told them, yeah, you're right. We've never done it that way, but never say never and never say always. From this point forward, we're doing it that way because it shouldn't take forever if you see a problem to address that problem. But what I didn't recognize, now, keep in mind, I'm a new superintendent, and I relieve these police officers of their police powers that quickly, something that's never historically been done in CPD. So they were upset because they couldn't understand, why would you do that? Because I'm trying to change a culture. We have to be accountable for what we do, period. I'm not going to ignore anything. I'm not going to fluff it. It is what it is. So what I didn't recognize, Brandis, was what that did, it started sending that message of accountability. So let's fast forward. They were upset, but they found out I was going to be fair. And the reason I know that the culture is changing is this one statistic that I'm going to share with you all. I wouldn't do it before, but I'll share it. So in looking at policing, I've been a cop 30 years in the city, so I know where our blind spots are and what needs to be corrected. So I knew the training was an issue for use of force, because you get robust training coming out of the academy, and then that was pretty much it. You get PowerPoint, streaming video, stuff like that, but not hands-on. Use of force is a perishable skill. We need to train on that every year. I got robust training in 1988 as a recruit. The next time I got that hands-on scenario-based training was when I became superintendent and made it mandatory. So now we train on use of force every year, like we should have been doing all the time. Plus, they know I'm going to hold them accountable, all right? So I'm gonna tell you this stat. The reason I know we're going through a culture change, in 2011 was a high water mark for the last 10 years in terms of police-involved shootings. It was 91 that year. 91 police-involved shootings, November 7th of 2011. This year in 2019, 16. And 3 of those were off duty, where these officers were victims of carjackings. So on duty, 13. We came from 90 to 13. I'm so incredibly proud of these officers for using that restraint, using de-escalation, honoring the sanctity of life, because they have to make these decisions like that. But it shows it can be done. That's how I know this culture is changing.
You talked about the video of the shooting that happened shortly after you were sworn in. You were in a different position, of course, when Laquan McDonald, when he died, and you saw that video fairly early on.
A couple weeks after that.
What was your initial reaction? Not necessarily as, what is my duty as an officer, as a chief. What was your reaction as a person?
So Laquan McDonald, that incident happened, I think, October 20th of 2014. So it was sometime in early November when I saw it. Now, I was the deputy chief of patrol executive officer at the time. So my position was only to look at the video and see if we need to do some additional training or equipment issues. So I didn't see the video when the large group of command staff saw it. It was me, myself, and the chief of patrol. And remember this also, I wasn't privy to any of the context behind it in terms of what the officer said or did. I didn't know any of that. I only knew what you all know when you saw it. So when I saw the video, I was like, because I had heard stuff, of course, and I'm looking at the video, it was disturbing. It was troubling. What you can't really tell when you look at the video, you can once you're told the story. But if you don't know the story, you really can't tell exactly how many times Officer Van Dyke fired his weapon. You really can't tell because I don't think the muzzle flash, you could really tell from that. And you really couldn't tell from looking at Laquan on the ground. But what I could discern was the puffs of smoke coming off the concrete. And when I saw it, I got to be honest, I was troubled by it. So like I said, it was myself and the chief of patrol. And after the video, after the lieutenant showed it to us, I got up out of my seat. The chief of patrol and myself didn't say a word to each other. I just got out of my seat and went to my office and just sat there for a little bit because it was troubling. It was. But I didn't get the rest of the context probably until you all did, because the way the police department is structured, I was in the Bureau of Patrol at the time. The only people that's privy to that information would be the first deputy, the superintendent, and the chain of command in the Bureau of Detectives. So a lot of the stuff following it, I didn't know it until probably you all knew it.
So today the ACLU issued a statement on your retirement and said, quote, "The department continues to lag far beyond police agencies and other communities on curbing excessive use of force and building strong relationships between the police and communities of color." Do you think your department has done enough?
I totally disagree with that statement. You can always do more, but that statistic I just threw out to you all tells you right there that no, we're not lagging behind in a lot of things. Now, can we do better? Of course we can, but I'll give you an example of that. So one of the reasons our clearance rate is what it is because of the trust that the community has in its police department, especially in the black and brown communities. And some of that is warranted, some of it is perception. But whatever it is, we have to fix that. So I've done nothing in these almost 4 years but try to repair those things. And so this is how I know we're moving in the right direction. We're not where we want to be, but we're moving in the right direction. So 7-year-old Giselle was shot on Halloween night, right? In the immigrant community, Hispanic community. They believe in their police department so much now, and they trust what we're saying to them. Those tips, those phones started ringing off the hook. And we're talking about people that could possibly be undocumented. But they're trusting us enough now to give us the information. That's how we were able to bring those offenders into custody, because they trusted CPD enough to give us that information and know that we're not coming after them for immigration status. So what I would say to the ACLU is, no, we're not where we want to be, but we're certainly making progress.
They also reference a stop and frisk report from last month from the independent monitor for the agreement between the city and the ACLU, still showing that 70% of all pedestrian stops by police are on African Americans, even though blacks only make up 33% of the city's population. Now, that's using 2017 numbers.
Okay.
What is your reaction to that?
So we have to look at the victimization of people that have been victimized by crime. When you look at that, and look at where the crime predominantly occurs in our city, it's predominantly on the south and west sides. And unfortunately, those places are occupied mostly by African American people. So if they're giving us those descriptions of African Americans, then why would we stop a white guy? The answer is we wouldn't. So I think we're doing the best we can with that, but we have to take it into context. If the people that are perpetrating these crimes based off the victims and witnesses' descriptions say it's a white guy in a red jacket, that's who we're gonna stop, white guys in red jackets. I think that, when we first entered into that agreement, our street stops dropped by about 80%. But what didn't decline was our gun arrests. Those actually went up by about 12%. So what that told me was that now the officers are stopping the right people for the right reasons. And that's what we want. We don't want, I tell officers all the time, of course, it's no secret I grew up in Cabrini Green. Just because you see a black kid with dreadlocks in his pants down his butt, that doesn't mean he's a gangbanger. Sometimes they're trying to fit in to get from point A to point B. But if any officer worth their salt, once they talk to that person, within 30 seconds, the difference between if this kid is hardcore or if he's just trying to get along. So certainly we can do better, but I think that we use statistics sometimes to make the arguments that we want to make.
Is it sometimes not a matter of police officers, they're working the beat and they think, these guys may or may not have guns just because of what they've, just the research that they've done, not necessarily so much, we got a call from a potential victim, and cops are making stops based on their own intuition and their own beliefs.
Yeah, now, we used to do a lot of that, but that type of policing, we really shy away from now. Because of that agreement, they have to give articulable reason for why they stopped individuals. Now, what is done is it's a little cumbersome now because we went from an index-sized card to record street stops to a 2-page form. So it's a little bit more cumbersome now, but now the officers that when they stop folks, they have to document while they're stopping. And there has to be reasonable suspicion. So no longer do we just, and we get these calls all the time where people say, it's 4 black guys on the corner. I think they're going to do something. Do what? You know, just because they have a right to stand there. And what's crazy to me about this whole thing is that now I'm telling cops, you better have reasonable, articulable suspicion before you stop these guys, right? So if they go to that corner and they see him and they're just standing there, maybe on a cell phone, that's not reasonable suspicion to stop them. But that same lady that called to complain about those guys, now she's calling me. Your cops came by, looked at them, and they kept going. So we're between a rock and a hard place with this thing, you know. So I understand, look, every morning I wake up, I'm an African-American man living in this city. My son, my brother, my cousins. So I'm acutely aware of that. You know, so it doesn't escape me that I will be the first to acknowledge. We used to stop people for no reason, and that was wrong. But now I think we're better. Are we quite there yet? I'm not comfortable enough to say we're 100% there, but I think we are getting better.
Today you talked about some of the work that you're proud of over these last 3 years. Obviously, a huge increase in technology. You've discussed officer training leading to a reduction in officer-involved shootings, the addition of body-worn cameras, your work to expand the reach of the Office of Community Policing. What do you wish that you had gotten to in these last 3+ years that you didn't quite make it to?
You know what, Brandis, I'll tell you this. So there's a lot of angst still internally within the police department about the consent decree. I really wish we had entered into that consent decree earlier, so I would have had the opportunity to bring the department and the city through it. Because I am convinced, despite what the street cops, they really aren't informed about it, so they're nervous about it because they're really not educated about what it actually is. But I'm convinced that consent decree will make us better when we get done. It ensures that we get the resources for the training and the tools that we need. And it also ensures that the police department will listen to the citizens. Because you all actually are our boss. You're our clients, man. We work for you. And so I think that consent decree will force the Chicago Police Department to partner with the people that they serve instead of being the way the mentality before was enforcers. No, we're guardians of this city, and we're part of the community. And the consent decree will ensure that that's done. You know, I have no problem with another set of eyes looking at what we do, but the one thing I wish I could have done was bring us through that, because I'm convinced we'll be better at the end of it.
What will you tell your successor are the top 3, whoever that may be?
I have no idea.
Okay, just making sure. What will you tell your successor are like the top 3 hardest parts of the job? What advice will you give that person?
So the top 3 hardest part, you know, I tell people all the time, I'm a beat cop that happens to be superintendent. So I think like beat cops. I was a beat cop. I'm actually still a beat cop. I just happen to be wearing 4 stars now. So cops hate 2 things, change and the way things are. So
tough life.
So they just hate everything. So the toughest things I would say to a person coming in is you can't tell cops you believe in them and you've got their back. You got to show them that, you know, and you show them that, excuse me, by providing the resources that they need. These cops they scream out for better training. And to Rahm Emanuel's credit, I will give him credit for getting the resources so we can provide that to him. And Mayor Lightfoot now is continuing that effort. But you have to show the cops that you got their back, but you also have to let them know when they're wrong, they got to deal with the consequences of being wrong. I would also tell them one of the toughest parts is that relationship between the black and brown communities and the police superintendent and the police department. You have to maintain that relationship because you can't cultivate that relationship when it hits the fan. You have to have it already, because if you wait, it's too late. You know, and I would tell them you have to talk to people. You might not be able to do what they're asking you to do, but you always can listen to their concerns. And sometimes, believe it or not, you can make that happen for them. So that's a key piece. And the last piece, and maybe the most important piece. So I've been a cop 31 years now. The law enforcement profession as a whole has always been kind of closed and didn't share too much. Those days are over. You better be as transparent as you can be. Now, we still have to keep in mind that there's certain things we can't share right at the moment because we don't want to harm the integrity of whatever investigation is going on. But the public, here's the problem with the public. If you don't give them information that they're looking for, then they're left to their own devices. And they'll create a narrative, and it might be light years away from what the narrative actually is. And once that narrative takes off, it's a monumental task to walk it back because perception becomes reality. So with law enforcement today in 2019, we have to recognize as a profession, transparency is key to having the public's trust because when you don't share things with them, they think you're hiding something. And so I would tell the new person, whomever he or she is, you got to be transparent, especially in the city of like Chicago, because I'll give you all credit. You all hold our feet to the fire and you keep us accountable, but that's actually a good thing because we work for you and we should be transparent to you.
Before I open it up for questions, because I know you all have plenty, what's next?
Well,
Medical school?
Say again?
Medical school?
You know what? Nah, it's probably too late for that. But I think in this next, so my last day will be January 1st. I want to take some time just to catch my breath for a moment and just kind of talk with my family and make a sound decision. But I will tell you all this. Being superintendent in a major city is a high-octane job. And by nature, I'm a high-octane person. So I don't sleep a lot at night because I'm constantly thinking about stuff. And typically, I'm 3 or 4 months ahead in thought from where we are today. So I know this. I can tell you this. I'm not done. So I will be in some form or fashion doing something down the line. But that first month, I'm going to take, because I'll tell you all this little tidbit. So I bought a new house in 2016, right? And all I talked about that whole time, I had to find a house so I could get my man cave straight, right? So
And you haven't been in it at all, have you?
Man, look, Brandis, the little 10-year-old, he's taking it over. There's all kind of crap down there. And I'm like, dude, this is the man cave. You got to go upstairs. So one of the things I am going to do is get my man cave straightened out. And after I do that, then we'll see what's next.
Priorities.
Yeah.
Okay. I would like for you all to ask some questions. I'm sure you have them. I think there's a microphone right there. Hello, how are you?
Hi, Superintendent.
Hi.
My name's Adam. I'm a first-year undergraduate student here in the University of Chicago. So I've heard that Chicago and the state of Illinois have some of the most strict gun purchasing laws in the country. But many of the guns that are used to commit crimes in Chicago are purchased in Indiana or other states and brought across state lines. So how have you dealt with this problem in your time as the superintendent, and what more could be done?
So, it's the narrative that we have some of the strictest gun laws just isn't correct. It's not factual. We hear that all the time, but it's just not correct. It's not. The fact that people ask me all the time, what's the difference between Chicago, New York, and LA? One of the biggest differences is that we sit in between Indiana and Wisconsin, who have some of the most lax gun laws in the country. Now, I'm not beating up on them, but what that does, it allows people from Chicago to go right over the border. They can take a laundry bag, fill it up with guns, and come right back, sell them to gangbangers, and pow, pow, pow. So one of the things I've advocated for since being superintendent, there's no reason in the world, to me, why we can't have universal background checks. That's just bizarre that you can go somewhere, not go through a background check, and purchase a handgun you could kill somebody in a split second with that one piece of equipment. So universal background checks is something that we need to do as a country. I'm not advocating to take guns away from people that can legally have them. I'm okay with that. But let's do it the right way. So universal background checks. Think about this for a moment. You all go out and buy a car, right? If you want to sell that car to Eddie Johnson, what do you have to do? You have to fill out transfer papers. Yeah. We make it so easy for people to obtain illegal guns in this country. It blows my head off sometimes at night. Well, how come we can't simply have a law that says if you sell that gun to Eddie Johnson, just create the paper trail? I'm sick of when we have these poor people gunned down in our city, we trace that gun down, and we find the original owner. Oh, it was stolen in a burglary 3 months ago. Did you report it to the police? Nah, I was gonna get to it. No, that's because you sold that gun illegally to somebody. You know, these other states, 40% of our murder weapons were purchased in the state of Illinois. 60% Indiana, Wisconsin, Mississippi, Georgia. So we have to do a better job of also partnering with our federal partners, ATF in particular, to stop the illegal flow into this city. But I got to tell you, I am not optimistic about that. I thought when the Parkland shooting happened, I thought if ever we were going to mobilize as a country, that would have been it. If we can't stand behind those young kids, I don't know when you do it. I really don't.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Meredith. I'm a first-year graduate student getting a Master's of Public Policy. Thank you for your service to our city. I'm wondering if you could comment on your decision not to attend Trump's speech at the police chiefs conference, and if you kind of stand by that decision because it showed that he's not welcome here in Chicago, or if maybe you regret it a little for feeding into kind of divisiveness.
No, I don't regret it at all. I told you all in the beginning, I grew up in Cabrini Green, and I saw racism at its worst. And look, if you don't stand for something, then you'll fall for anything. And I'm not going to mention names because sometimes you just don't use brain cells for certain things. This is one of them. But Chicago is such a diverse city. For local law enforcement, our immigrant community, we need them to be able to trust us. Because if something happens, God forbid, you want to be able to help them. But if they're afraid of you, they won't do it. Yeah, I got a lot of flack about that, a ton. And, my name was mentioned, I think, 38 times that day. Oh, but so clearly I got under somebody's skin. But I'll never regret doing what I think is the right thing to do, ever. So if it happens again, guess what? I'm not going.
Hi, Superintendent Johnson. Thank you so much for coming, and congratulations on your retirement. My name's Angela. I'm a fourth year in the college. Okay. My question is, how do you deal with the tensions between politics and public service? Like, being in a role like yours, how do you make sure that you make decisions that aren't viewed as political?
That's a great question. I tell you all, when I became superintendent, I went to Springfield, and I met with the Speaker of the House, Mike Madigan, and he said something to me that I was like, oh, Lord, what did I get myself into? He said, Superintendent, he said, look, I've been following you. I'm really glad that you took this job. He said, you don't know this, and you'll never accept this. But from this day forward, you're a politician. And I told him, no, I'm not. But man, was he right. So what I have to do as superintendent is when I'm making decisions, I can't be swayed by my emotional feelings. I can't be swayed by politicians. I can't be swayed by the public sentiment. I have to go by the rules, the law, police policy, our general orders. And I stayed right there to keep all that other stuff. And trust me when I tell you this, You get those phone calls. You do. And I make it perfectly clear. I hear your concerns, but at the end of the day, I have to do what's right. I don't know what that is right now while I'm on this phone, but when I do, that's the direction I'm going.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Superintendent. My name's Kenneth Newman. When you got appointed, you came to a ward meeting of Alderman Sophia King at Hales Franciscan, and we met. And at the time, I asked you if you would be willing to start Police Athletic League, which I had been involved in Miami. And I sent you a letter, and unfortunately, I never even got a reply. As crime has come down here, do you think that some officers who may have a little more free time on their beat would be able to have more interaction with kids, especially in the parks and at schoolyards and sports?
Yeah, you know what? That's a great question. I'm sorry I never responded to it. I probably never even got the letter. But in answer to your question, we have a lot of leagues going on now with police officers. Yep, are coaching. So if you're interested in getting involved in it, give me your information because I still got a couple months to go. So I got a lot of stuff to cram into that time. But if you're interested, I will connect you with the right people so that we can get something going.
I have some ideas. We'll be in touch.
Okay.
He'll give you a cell phone number. He
will.
hands it out to.
I will.
To 312. I'm kidding. I don't know what his number is.
That's funny. Half of Chicago has my cell phone number, and they use it too. Trust me.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. My name is Indy, and I'm a second year in the college. So I just kind of wanted to go off of the question that somebody just asked you, where you said that when you are making decisions, you have to take a more objective and sort of unemotional stance. But
Right.
I imagine that a lot of what you work with also makes you think empathetically and emotionally. So my question was, as a leader, where do you think you can sort of fit in like these more emotional and empathetic ideas behind policy making?
Yeah, you know, that's a really great question. So there is a place for that, you know, but let's take, for instance, police-involved incident. When I'm looking at that, I have to go straight by what the rules say because officers have contractual rights that I have to abide by. My emotions might be telling me do this, but the law and policy tells me to do that. So where I really use the empathy is when I'm creating certain policies. I'll stick that in there so that officers have an understanding of where I'm trying to get them to. You know, and then sometimes with less, the smaller disciplinary issues, you know, I will have maybe the officer and the person that's complaining on them meet so they can talk about what happened and use that as a form so that it's not punitive, but that the officer learns something. Because I think people get discipline mixed up sometimes. Discipline shouldn't be used to just hammer somebody. A lot of times it should be used to change a person's behavior. Because sometimes people make mistakes because they're just uninformed. So there is a place for empathy, and I try to stick it in there when I'm creating policies and things of that nature.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hi, thank you very much for your service and all you've done to lower the gun violence rate in communities throughout the city. I'm Mary Stoner Saunders. I'm with Strides for Peace, and we work with organizations to support them to end gun violence as well. And many of the people who do that, like your officers, work with court and gang-involved kids
Right.
In the community, and as such, really confront trauma every day. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about trauma and wellness on the police force. We just hosted a trauma retreat for some of these workers. They'd never been on something like that. Guys who've been doing gang intervention for 20, 30 years had a transformational experience when the facilitator taught them how to breathe, right? That's crazy.
It is.
And so it makes me think there's a lot of parallels, you know, of what the police officers on the beat have to be exposed to. So could you please talk about trauma in the police force? And I see that as different as mental health. I think they're related but separate. And if there's any efforts going on right now to be proactive and sort of foster resiliency on that level.
Certainly. So let me tell you all a little story. So a younger Eddie Johnson, when I was a sergeant, I was transferred to Area 4 Detective Division. At Harrison and Kedzie. And I was there for 7 years. And so I would go out on all shootings, murders, and I got to tell you, I didn't recognize it, but that was trauma for me. I mean, I just got tired of seeing, I did. I got tired of seeing it. And just when I got to my wit's end, remember I told you God is a funny dude. So right when I got to the point where I'm like, man, I got to do something different because I'm tired of seeing this, I got promoted to lieutenant. And I was taken out of that. So I understand the trauma of what police officers go through. So when I became superintendent, I never understood coming up through the ranks. I've been involved in 4 police-involved shootings. And at that time, we gave you 3 days off. You didn't talk to anybody. And then you come back to work, and they stick you right back in that place where you were involved in that shooting. And that was ridiculous. So one of the things that we do now, because I recognize that, let me not forget, we only had 3 licensed clinicians to service an agency of 12 to 13,000 people. That's ridiculous. So one of the things that we did, John Escalante was the interim superintendent at the time, and I was his chief of patrol. We instituted a 30-day administrative leave so these officers could download. We also stopped just sending the officer that might have fired the weapon or hit somebody. We stopped just sending that officer, and we would send a group of them. So to destigmatize going to seek help. Since I became superintendent, we're now up to 11 licensed clinicians. Now, all of them are assigned to different units throughout the city. So what I envision is for them to go there prior to an officer actually getting in trouble, so we can normalize them talking to these folks. So when they do get in trouble, they'll be more apt to look out for them, you know. But the biggest problem in law enforcement, it's a macho profession. So to seek help was looked at as weak, when it's actually courageous. You know, so we have had an extensive outreach program in the last 3 years in terms of helping officers to go seek help. And we brought families in to do this. So now we have a really robust program in terms of offering officers assistance, because, you know, we've had 8 officers commit suicide in the last 12 months. So that's something we take very seriously, and we've made a lot of strides. But that's the one thing, when you ask me what was the one thing I wish I could complete, that officer wellness piece of it, because we got these 11 clinicians. I'm not sure that's the right number. I think probably somewhere in the 20s would probably be a better number, because I don't want to overwork them. You know, but one of the things we did, myself and some chiefs did an outreach video, and we told the stories that we had been through as rank and file police officers, because I wanted them to know, as a sergeant, I had to call EAP, employee assistance. One night I was going through a divorce, and I had the weight of the world, it seemed like, about 2 in the morning. I was working midnight, so I pulled over and called EAP, and I talked to this counselor for about 2 hours. Now, I never had suicidal thoughts. I just needed to tell somebody something. And after I made that phone call, man, you talk about a weight being lifted. But we made that video to let officers know, here you got a guy that was a sergeant that had to utilize EAP, and now I'm the superintendent. So it's okay to seek help. So that was the point of that. So I think we're heading in the right direction, but we can certainly do better.
Thank you for sharing that. The other side of addressing trauma is building resilience too. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ellie. I'm a first year in the Divinity School. I'm from New York, so we're familiar with many of these problems. I'm curious about what do you think could be done more to recruit officers of color?
So, listen. When you talk about change, all right, and I know that's what we're talking about tonight, change. You cannot just talk about it. You have to be willing to be part of it. Otherwise, you're spinning your wheels about a lot of stuff, because we cannot wait for other people to make change for us. We just can't. If we want change, then we have to be willing to put ourselves out there to create that change. Since I've been superintendent, we have a robust program to diversify the police department. The city is a third white, a third black, and a third Hispanic. Your police department should reflect those demographics. So we have a massive messaging campaign. You'll hear me as well as other chiefs on radio spots, TV spots. We have a phone bank where myself and our chiefs will call potential candidates. But here's the rub in the black community. Because that narrative is out there that, the police, we have to break through that. Because the simple fact of the matter is, it's simple math. If I don't have the black officers or Hispanic officers to put out there, if they don't apply and take the test, I can't put them out there. So we have done a good job, because our last few entry exams were 70% minority applying for the job. And that, man, I'm extremely proud of that. We're still not where we want to be, because we still have to break through certain barriers. And that thing about the trust between, especially the black community and the police, I have to continue to work on that. But we're in a much better place than we were. Now, having said that, I would say this to you. You can't just take the test. You got to go through the whole process. And I'll just share one quick story with you all. So one of the things I do as superintendent also to encourage that, on exam day, I go to the testing site and I welcome people in there. When they go to the academy to be tested, I go there too. And I'll never forget, I went to one and this black kid said, "You're that guy." I'm like, okay. Yeah. So he said, "Man, I really want this job." And then he said, do they drug test you? Yeah, we do. And he said, is weed on there? Well, yeah, it is. I said, as a matter of fact, see that curtain back there? When you get back there, they're going to drug test you. And this kid looked at me and he said, "Super, I can't give up weed yet." And he got out of line and walked out. So we have to break through those things. This is a great department, and it can be even better. The more diverse we make it, the better things we'll get, but we cannot make it as diverse as we want to if we don't get the candidates.
Of all the people that young man chose to ask that question of, it was the superintendent of police.
Exactly. So he might not have been a good candidate anyway.
He didn't even know who you were,
He
man.
did.
We've got time for one more question.
Okay, great. Thanks for coming, Superintendent Johnson.
Thanks for having me.
My name's Andrew. I'm a first year at the Booth School of Business here. And one thing I'm sure you've gotten no shortage of flack on is the homicide clearance rate here in the city. Mm-hmm. You've talked a lot about, I think, the separate issues that contribute to it being, really low relative to our peer cities. I mean, what do you think it's going to take to finally up that clearance rate and make sure we're actually, at least getting it above 50%?
Yeah, so we're at about, I think, 48% right now. And you look at our other comparable cities, they're in the high 60s, mid to high 60s to 70%. So an acceptable clearance rate, according to the FBI, would be about 60%. We haven't been at that mark except for 2 years in the last 20 years, 2004 and 5, I believe. So I think what it takes is a combination of things. We neglected our detective division for some time. It was actually downsized, which in my opinion was a mistake. So now we beefed it back up. When I came in, it was only about maybe close to 800 detectives. Now it's almost close to 1,200. So that's a good thing. We've given them the tools that they need. Listen, Chicago is a world-class city. Its police department should be world-class. When I found out that our detectives, if they got a video from a store, they didn't have the equipment in the area to look at the video. So they had to wait until the owner of the store came back, called them up. Let's say it happened Friday night. Owner ain't coming back till Monday morning. They had to wait for that guy to come back, go back over there, put the video in there, and then look at it. That's ridiculous for a city of our size and the second largest department in the country. We fixed all of that now. So now what we have to work on is our relationship with the community. And the police department and the state's attorney's office have to be able to ensure these witnesses that we can protect them if they testify. Because, when you live in a challenging area, oftentimes you know who the shooter is, but guess what? That shooter knows you too. And they know that you saw him. So we have to do a better job of ensuring to those people we can protect them so that they'll be willing to come forth and testify. Okay?
Excellent questions, all of you. Thank you. Some of them were on my list, but I jumped over them. I'm kidding. Thank you for joining us this evening. Please help me thank the superintendent.
Thank you. Thank you.